How to give rise to faith is Saddha. What gives rise to faith, and how does faith function? How does it work? How to give rise to faith. Usually it's described as seeking out somebody more knowledgeable than you, giving heed to his word, heed to his instruction, what he might be saying. And usually it comes with observing this person. Okay, does this person really follow what he's saying? Does he keep his precepts? Is he practicing what he preaches? And on account of that, you see, okay, if this person really lives up to his word, lives up to his instruction, if he reaps benefits from his practice, maybe I too can experience the fruits of what he's talking about. And so the same comes in regard to the Buddha. People would hear, okay, this person speaks about supreme enlightenment, freedom from suffering, the ability to overcome our own defilements, our own bad mental habits, bad habits by body, speech, and mind. And so people would observe the Buddha, see how he practiced, see if he was genuine and honest, and really an authority in what he had to say. And so even the Sotapanna, the stream enterer, the Sakadagami, the once returner, and the Anagami, the non-returner, all of them are still proceeding by faith. And it isn't until one has fully liberated themselves and until they can say, okay, I have complete confidence in the Buddha. So all the while practicing, all the way up to full awakening, is one still, I guess you could say, they haven't really experienced what the Buddha has experienced himself. I guess so to go back, it starts by finding something worth putting faith into, exploring that, investigating that, seeing at least the person who's speaking about it, the person who's explaining this, is this genuine, is this true? And then at some point we have to take a leap of faith, So I guess that's why they're calling that. We suspend our disbelief in order to realize what such a person might be saying. And this is, I guess you can say, for those who are a bit more scientifically oriented, left brain leaning, this is all that science is about. Somebody has a theory or a hypothesis. They've experimented on that hypothesis, and then you take that hypothesis and you try to replicate their experiment in order to verify their results. And in the spiritual life, in the Dhamma, it's no different. And so faith is useful to the extent that we can, I guess it's just that. It gives us a path worth following. We have faith in many things, When people say, you've never rode on a plane before and somebody takes you to the airport and says, all right, you're going to hop in this tube and it's going to go up 40,000 feet in the air and it's going to land safely. Nobody's going to die. And until you've kind of verified that for yourself, it's a bit like, I don't know. Or we take a lot of things in our life on faith until we've inevitably verified them. And so in the holy life, it's kind of a big gamble. You give up a lot of sensuality, you give up your family, your friends, everything that you had planned for yourself back in the life. You take it on faith that it will lead you to something more worthwhile. And I suppose the same could be said for people who are not monastics, who are leading the household life, that you give dana to the monastics, or you cultivate aspects of generosity, which are, the Buddha's encouraging you to give up the things that you've worked very hard to earn. And you take it on faith that this will lead to a wholesome and beneficial outcome, to better planes of rebirth, to more wholesome states of mind. So faith is useful. In many of the lists, it starts as the first point. Through faith, one gets energy. Energy, in Thai they say, gamlang jai, encouragement, enthusiasm for the practice, enthusiasm to cultivate wholesome states. Through this enthusiasm, you cultivate mindfulness. Through mindfulness, samadhi, concentration, tranquility of the mind will arise. And through that concentration, you can finally begin to see reality as it is. Panya. It's faith. I hope that answered your question.
The sutta often mentions that the conditions of rising for faith is dukkha. And a person who is facing, say, death is imminent, for instance, is the very direct and clear dukkha. And how this dukkha give rise to faith? in particular the Buddhist faith.
How does dukkha give rise to faith, in particular when you're about to die? I guess it becomes very real quick. It becomes very apparent that, I don't know. Yeah, for me, I mean, there's many occurrences in the scriptures, in the suttas, where upon death, it seems many people can either become a stream enterer or become enlightened. And it seems when one is faced with that very real situation of having to continue on to another kind of rebirth, one which might not be, human or above, more pleasant, more serene, that you have an opportunity to really let go. Like this is the last time in this stretch of consciousness that is aware of the Dhamma, this is the last opportunity to really let go of the reins and bring an end to this process. And I've never had a near-death experience, so I couldn't speak from my own experience, but any other dukkha, in the broader sense of dukkha, depression, anxiety, fear, bodily dukkha. How many of you are having aches and pains right now? I have aches walking down to Tim's every day. I'm 29. So these are the kinds of dukkha that the Buddha was talking about, from the most minuscule of stubbing your toe to the very apparent dukkha of wars, disease, famine, all the worst kinds of things that we have to endure as humans living in this world. And so for me, when I came to the Dhamma, this kind of dukkha was very apparent, and I was plagued with this question of why. Who thought this up? If God did this to us, it seems like a very cruel joke. If we're caught up in something, then what's the causes for it? And if I'm doing something to further it along, how can I bring it to a halt? And so that's where the Buddha's teaching really puts the instruments of disentangling, deconstructing this whole process. He gives it to us. It's really an invitation to look at reality in a certain way, to look at the situation in a particular way, in a way in which we can, I guess, relate to ourselves in the world. In a way, we're no longer infatuated and craving and desiring and hoping that there will be something permanent and satisfying here. And in the case of dukkha, when it's very clear that you can't just turn dukkha off, you go bankrupt, you lose a member of your family, you lose a limb, you lose all your money, whatever the worst kind of loss that you can experience, the pain that comes from that, there's no immediate off switch. There's no bringing back of the family or the money. We find ourselves in a situation where we're very much not the controllers of it. It's as if we're in somebody else's, sandbox, somebody else's, hamster wheel. And this is not to say that, somebody created this, but who knows. But we do play a very active role in the amount of dukkha that we formulate in our minds. And there's a lot of inertia behind it. There's a lot of momentum behind it. And so the more that we actively realize it through the faith and the energy, with the mindfulness, we can say, okay, perhaps I won't take the chocolate today, or perhaps I won't cultivate this thought, or I won't speak harshly to this person. There's a whole sutta about this exact thing called the proximate cause, and people call it the transcendental dependent origination. And the classical dependent origination goes through, ignorance comes consciousness, name and form, the 6 sense bases, all the way down to birth, aging, and death. And at the end of that, of the classical list, the Buddha turns around and says, when a person has experienced dukkha, faith arises, and through faith basically leads to the wanting of the desire to get out of samsara. So yeah, that's the best I can muster up at this point in time.
Bhante, by saying dukkha, it sounds like very pessimistic. What are the positive aspects that inspired Bhante to investigate, have faith in Buddha Dhamma? The positive aspect.
The positives. Yeah, Buddhism does get a pretty bad rap, a bit labeled as being pessimistic, because it calls out the problem. No, I mean you have to. Yeah, I guess you have to realize that there's a problem before you can do anything to fix it. And I suppose that is the optimistic side about Buddhism. There is nibbana. There is a way to alleviate the dukkha, and in that alleviation, it's not all pain and suffering. I mean, we do have things called the jhanas, which are very blissful and pleasant states. So it starts with the acknowledgement of dukkha. It's a very integral part of reality itself. But after seeing that, it's okay, how do I bring the mind to a state which is free from dukkha? In particular, mental dukkha, the anxieties, the depressions, the worrying thoughts, the unwholesome thoughts, the stress. And so with the regular practice of meditation, the regular practice of wholesome speech and thoughts of loving kindness, thoughts of non-ill will, the mind will slowly settle down. And so I guess, for me at least, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. There's a way in which I can come out of my suffering. And I'd say, yeah, definitely after being a monk for 5 years, the suffering's much less. The suffering these days is just, man, I was finished already. Because oftentimes the practice can be a lot longer than you thought. You think, okay, I'll be a monk, 3 months in, arahant, It's not so simple. I mean, there's just so much conditioning that we have to disentangle. If somebody's ever given you a big tangle of rope and then asked you to figure it out, it's a lot of it's just you're pulling here, you're pulling there. Oftentimes you're tightening it while you're trying to disentangle it, and it's not so straightforward. But you do know that if you continue at it, if you're patient with it, eventually you'll kind of bring out a straight line of rope. But I guess as with any doctor, you go to the doctor, you hope to hear good news, but you do hope that if you do have an issue, that he could point out that issue. And the Buddha is often called the great surgeon, the great physician, for that reason, because he can point out the disease, he can give you the cause of it, he can give you the cure, and how do you, administer that cure onto yourself. I gotta ask, how many of you has a daily meditation practice where you sit at least 5 minutes? Can I get a show of hands? Watching the mind. That's at least important, At least having some general daily mindfulness. I mean, what you do on the cushion bleeds into the daily life, and what you do in the daily life bleeds into the cushion. So, well, if you're not at least setting some time every day to practice, how do you ever hope to taste the fruit of the Dhamma? Otherwise, it just becomes a bit of just theory. And we're hoping to have more pleasant states of mind, but we can't just set aside 5 minutes, 10 minutes, ideally 30 minutes a day. No amount of words that the Buddha talks about, or words that I can give, or Bhante Arya gives, can never be fully understood, fully tasted. And you'll know, you keep a regular practice of it, and you see the thoughts will just slow down at some point, and the mind settles, the hindrances they've been giving you quite a lot of a fight. Sensuality, sensual desire, then there's this person I don't like, there's the ill will, then okay, you might be a bit drowsy, the mind is restless about what is done in the past, or in this case doubt. Doubt is very much linked to faith, faith about whether the Buddha was right, is the Dhamma true, were there other people who realize the Dhamma. This doubt begins to settle down, and you begin to see a bit of the clarity of the mind. It's like a cup full of sand, and you shake it up, and then the sand's all, it's all murky. The water gets murky, but then after a while it begins to settle down, begins to settle on the bottom, but the water above it becomes clear. And I know that there's a lot of strings in the world these days, a lot pulling for our attention, whether it be the news, or TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, whatever it may be. But we're just kind of giving our attention to these strings. And I guess what the Buddha encourages us to do, what meditation allows us to do, is to take some autonomy over our minds, responsibility for our minds. And while what you see online, what the devices can give us is a bit more gross, a bit more obvious, the pleasure that comes from that. But the pleasure that comes from meditation, from mindfulness practice, it's a bit more subtle, but it's more beneficial, it's more clean. The mind feels more clean. Guided meditation, okay. Wait a second. I want to see if I can find that sutta. Maybe I'll just read the sutta out, related to his point, and then we can have a guided meditation. Bhikkhus, I say that the destruction of the taints is for one who knows and sees, not for one who does not know and see. And for one who knows what, for one who sees what, does the destruction of the taints come about, such as form, such as origin, such as passing away, such as feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. So he knows the origination of the five aggregates, born from clinging and craving, from conceit, from ignorance. He knows how they cease, which is the removal of that very same clinging and craving. I say, bhikkhus, that the knowledge of destruction in regard to destruction has a proximate cause. It does not lack a proximate cause. And what is the proximate cause for the knowledge of destruction? It should be said liberation. And what is the proximate cause for liberation? It should be said dispassion. And what is the proximate cause for dispassion? It should be said disenchantment. And what is the proximate cause for disenchantment? It should be said the knowledge and vision of things as they really are. So after one has come to see reality as it is, mainly the three characteristics, it's like none of these insights, anicca, dukkha, anatta, none of these are novel or new to us. But the difference between one who is knowledge and vision, it's grown so strong, this sanya, this awareness of the three characteristics, accompanied by the samadhi, where it's like it almost shifts the mind and shakes the mind into a different shape. It's totally non-physical. It's you've broken through to something which is just not very apparent to us. And what is the proximate cause for the knowledge and vision of things as they really are? It should be said concentration. And what is the proximate cause for concentration? It should be said happiness or pleasure, the happiness that comes from a mind which has settled itself through meditation practice, through non-remorse, by maintaining virtuous behavior, by keeping the precepts. And what is the proximate cause for happiness? It should be said tranquility. What is the proximate cause for tranquility? It should be said rapture. And what is the proximate cause for rapture? It should be said gladness or joy. And what is the proximate cause for gladness? It should be said faith. So through that faith, through that initial trust, through suspending whatever disbelief we have about the Buddha or his teachings, we put forth effort into a practice which will lead to a stillness of mind, the arising of joy. This really talks about the jhanas. And what is the proximate cause for faith? It should be said suffering. The Buddha can answer any question better than I can. And what is the proximate cause for suffering? It should be said birth. I mean, I didn't sign up for this. Did anybody? Do you remember signing on the dotted line? And what is the proximate cause for birth? It should be said existence. And what is the proximate cause for existence? It should be said clinging. The cause for clinging is craving. The cause for craving is feeling. The very fact that we have some kind of input that's pleasant or painful or neutral, or whatever tastes we have, whatever sights, whatever sounds or smells, all of this brings about some kind of feeling, and through that feeling, it, for whatever reason, pleasant feeling feels nice, and we want more of that. We want to hold on to that. And the Buddha says that this craving, this desire for feeling, and this holding on and attaching, this is the function. This is what causes birth and existence. And what is the cause for feeling? The cause for feeling is the 6 sense bases. There are these 6 outlets for whatever reason. The eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind. And the cause for the 6 sense bases is name and form. And the cause for name and form is consciousness. The cause for consciousness is volitional formations, and the cause for volitional formations is ignorance. So the Buddha is basically saying there's an ongoing process here. But the interesting part in this sutta is just suffering, which is very integral, a characteristic of life, is the very same condition that we can use to seek some kind of outlet for faith. I think it's why many people go to religion. They're looking for some kind of meaning, for some kind of understanding in life. And there's many, you have a whole list of religions to choose from, but why I chose Buddhism was it seemed to be very practical. I went back to America and somebody asked me, so you used to be such an atheist, you used to, because I went to Catholic high school, so I know about, Hail Mary full of grace and all of the above. And he said, you used to be such an atheist, how did you become a Buddhist? And I was like, well, I can tell you about Buddhism. You can find some mythological things, especially in the later texts, but if you pick this up, it's very instructional. It's very mechanical in many ways, There's eye, there's form, there's eye consciousness. The meeting of the 3 is eye contact. What do I need faith in to see that? It's very apparent. There's craving, that's very apparent. Pleasant feeling, I don't need a deep amount of faith to believe that. And also you can see craving increase and decrease depending on what fuel that you add to it. You like something, you keep on purchasing it, or you keep on eating the chocolate or whatever it might be. You can see the craving increase. You can see yourself become addicted to it. And likewise, when you pull back, when you resist that craving and desire, you can see it decrease. I guess what you really need faith in is the Nibbana part. Is Nibbana possible? But there's many benefits to be had before Nibbana.